I wanted to come back and share more information about what it means to borrow from a 401k. So what I'd like to do with you today is explore the options. What's the difference between borrowing from a 401k and withdrawing from a 401k, and what does it look like if I do either of those things? So let me start by saying this. I am specifically referring to a 401k if you work for a company that offers a 401k retirement plan. The rules may be different if you have a 403b, or if you have a 457, or if you have an IRA of any kind. This information may not apply. Okay, so know what kind of retirement plan you have. If you're not sure what kind of retirement plan you have, contact me. We can figure it out. So to jump right in, let's talk about what's the difference between withdrawing and borrowing. So when you take a withdrawal from a 401k, you are actually taking money out of your account and putting it in your own pocket, moving it to your checking account. When you do that, that money will be taxed as income, provided it was taken out of your paycheck pre-tax when you made the contribution. So we're just going to assume we're talking about pre-tax 401ks. So you're going to pay the income taxes, okay? And if you're younger than 59 and a half, you will pay a 10% penalty. Last year, during 2020, the CARES Act allowed us to take withdrawals from retirement plans and avoid that penalty. That has since ended. That penalty waiver has not been extended. So please know that if you take a withdrawal from your 401k, you will pay income taxes. You will pay the 10% penalty if you are younger than 59 and a half. So that's a big deal. Sometimes you can have the 10% penalty waived. There are certain provisions if you're a first-time home buyer and you're using the money toward the purchase. If you have a severe financial hardship, such as medical bills, foreclosure, or you're paying college tuition, those are instances where you could potentially have that penalty waived, but you really need to know your stuff. You need to be very specific about what you're using that money for to get that waiver. So be mindful of that. The other thing to consider if you take a withdrawal from your 401k is that money is now out of the stock market. Within your 401k, that money is being invested for you so that it has the opportunity to grow over time. So the money in your 401k is not just the money you put in, it's also the growth that it's experienced. If you take the money out, it's not in the market anymore, so there's a cost to that. Comparing that to borrowing from your 401k, what that means is you're taking the money out for a period of time with an agreement to pay it back, and there's a certain schedule over which you will pay it back. So that means there's no taxes and no penalty, because the stipulation is the money will be going back into the account. Now, if you borrow, your money still comes out of the stock market, so it's not being invested. However, a benefit to borrowing is you are going to be set up on a schedule. Traditionally, the repayment term is 5 years. And with every paycheck, you're going to make a small payment back to that 401k loan. That payment is made up of both principal and interest, and the majority of that interest gets paid back to you. So you're sort of paying yourself back. The loan company or the company administering the loan will always take a small fee or a small piece of that interest because they need to get paid for transacting the business. But the majority of the interest that you pay is going back into your own pocket. It's not going to be enough to make up for whatever investment gains may have happened that year. However, if it's a bad year in the stock market, it could work out pretty well for you. It's impossible to time those things, but something to keep in mind. So that's a high-level difference between withdrawing and borrowing. So borrowing sounds pretty good in a lot of cases versus withdrawing. So what are the limits? Here's the first thing to note. You are only allowed to borrow up to the maximum of either $50,000 or half of the balance in your account. So there are limitations to what you can borrow. There's the opportunity cost for that money not being in the market. If the market has a stellar year and 2020 turned out to be pretty good, if you had borrowed that year, you'd have missed out on that. Usually there's a 5-year repayment. It could be longer than that. I have seen instances where if you're using that money for a first-time home purchase, you're allowed to borrow that money over 30 years to match your mortgage. So keep that in mind. Every employer is different. Every employer can have different rules that guide their 401k loan process. So talk to your employer. A really handy document to have is something called a summary plan description. Ask your HR representative. Every company that has a 401k is required by the Department of Labor to have a summary plan document. And it's exactly what it sounds like. It's a document that summarizes the details of your 401k plan. If you don't have it in your hands, get it. So find out what your plan allows. Every employment is different, so there are certain limits as to how much you're allowed to borrow, okay? So how do you choose between the two? How dire is your situation is the first question. How quickly do you need to get your hands on some money? And here's why that can make a difference. If you are pressed for time, I'd say 24 hours or less, a withdrawal might be helpful, only because there's a little bit more of a setup process when it comes to the 401k loan, although I've seen them turn around pretty quickly. The reason I look at time frame is because when you are considering a 401k loan, first you want to examine where else can you go? Where else can you go to get the money that you need to accomplish what you're trying to accomplish? Is there an opportunity to borrow money elsewhere for cheaper or no interest? Interest rates are very low right now. You may have a chance to explore something else, just so you're not taking your money out of your retirement plan and out of the investment market. If you have no other options, other than, for example, using a credit card, and we know your interest rate on your credit card is going to be a lot worse than what you would get for borrowing from your 401k, consider the 401k loan. Withdrawing is going to be a hard sell when you're having a conversation with a financial planner because of the taxes and penalties involved. So we'd probably explore borrowing before withdrawing, but every circumstance is different. So we'll work through that. Something to consider if you're going to borrow, though. Here's a big thing. If you aren't sure if you are going to be with your employer for the next 5 years, and you leave that employer while you still have an outstanding 401k loan, that loan, unless you pay it back in full in a lump sum when you leave, is going to be counted as a distribution and result in taxes and penalty if you're younger than 59 and a half. So one of the considerations is, how long do you think you'll be with your employer? You can always borrow it now and then leave your employer in 2 years and have to pay the penalty on the remainder of that balance. We can work that out. That's a timeline we can figure out. But knowing how long you'll be with your employer, or at least having a sense of that, can be helpful. So those are my tips for exploring whether or not it makes sense to borrow from your 401k. There's a lot to consider here, and I'm trying to consolidate it down into a 7-minute video, and it's tough to do. But I always say this, folks, every situation is different. If you are looking toward spending money on a big thing, and you might consider your 401k being a place that you can borrow money from to accomplish that, please contact me. Let's have a conversation. Let's make sure you're making the right steps, because a 401k loan can be a great tool unless it turns into a withdrawal, and then it results in taxes and penalty. There's a lot of implications from that, and I want to make sure you're making good decisions now so that you are setting yourself on a solid financial footing and you don't have problems to deal with in a few years. So my website is on the screen, menextyear.com. Leave me a comment wherever you are watching this. Let me know if this was helpful. Let me know if there's anything you want me to explore. What's going on in your life? If you've got questions or things you want to talk about and you want me to do a video about it, let me know. I'm happy to. And that's it for me today. I hope everybody has a great rest of the week, and I'll see you